Ms. Redmond, can you hear me?
I can.
And you can see me?
Yes.
Good. You are joining us from your office in Belfast, are you?
That's correct. I'm in Castle Buildings.
And is there anyone there with you in your room?
Only your technician. Just your technician.
Thank you. Now, you are talking to an audience in Fleetbank House. There are about 20, 30 people in the room, well socially distanced, I hasten to add, who are waiting and interested to hear what you have to say. But the really large audience is that beyond, joining us remotely. There'll probably be quite a number from Northern Ireland. So that's who you're talking to. The questions are going to be asked by Ms. Scott. That will be in a moment or two after Mary has asked you to be sworn. Mary.
Please state your full name.
Elizabeth Frances Redmond.
And repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely.
I do solemnly, sincerely.
And truly declare and affirm.
And truly declare and affirm.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
You are the Director of Population Health in the Department of Health in Northern Ireland. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you've been in that post since January 2017.
That's correct.
And in that post, you're responsible for the development and oversight of policy specific to protecting and improving population health and for blood safety and the response to the infected blood inquiry.
That's correct.
And so you presumably are the officer with responsibility for the infected blood payment scheme for Northern Ireland.
It's a part of my role, yes.
I'm going to refer to that as the scheme unless there's some other shorthand way you have of referring to it.
No, that's correct. I'm happy with that.
Okay. The scheme itself is run, I understand, by the regional, on behalf of the Department of Health in Northern Ireland, by the Regional Business Service Organisation. Why were they chosen to run the scheme?
Well, when I came into the role in January 2017, the decision had already been taken over the Northern Ireland scheme by the Minister for Health, who left the post in January, just a couple of weeks after I started my job, actually. At that time, my understanding from talking to my staff and looking back over the records is the intention had been for Northern Ireland to join up with England in a tender to appoint an administrator. My understanding is that remained the intention until early March in 2017, when we were notified that England was going to go alone with this and appoint their own administrator in England. So we were left in the position of deciding where we would go for an administrator. The Business Services Organisation, we tend to shorthand that with BSO, has got a legal basis for delivering administrative services for the health. So it was actually quite quickly we moved to exploring their appointment to administer this scheme, and we presented a business case of our department, which we had approved, and I think by the end of that very month we had agreed that this was the way forward.
And is it right that there's only one member of staff at the BSO who's the scheme manager, Colin Murray, the only one member of staff concerned with the scheme? Colin Murray, the scheme manager?
At this time, that's correct, yes.
Are you able to tell us how many, just to set your evidence in context, how many beneficiaries there are in the scheme as of now?
Yes, there's 104, as I understand it. It's the latest number. But obviously that number fluctuates over time. So that's just a snapshot.
You've already told us that at the point that you took up your post, well, a couple of weeks after you took up your post, the Northern Ireland Assembly collapsed. At the point you took up your post, the Health Minister was Minister Michelle O'Neill, is that right?
That's correct.
And she had made a statement to the Assembly about the scheme on the 22nd of December 2016, in which she said that she was that the decision was to follow the English model for the Northern Irish scheme. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that included an uplift to payments that had been agreed in England that year as well. So that was all rolled together.
I appreciate you weren't in post at the point that decision was made, but I just want to explore with you what if anything, you know about how that decision was made and the reasons why that decision was made. Do you know whether or not there was any consideration given by the Department of Health or by the Minister as to following the scheme in the Republic of Ireland?
As you've rightly said, I wasn't there or part of the development of those policy proposals that went to the Minister, but I think there was awareness of it, but that was not the main focus or part of the recommendations made to her.
Do you know why that was the case, why the recommendations made to her were not to follow the scheme as set up in the Republic of Ireland?
Well, I think the recommendations didn't provide that as an option as far as I can see, and I don't know the reason why that is. I wasn't in post at that time.
And do you know why the decision was made not to follow the Scottish scheme?
There was an issue of a cost differential, which was quite significant. From looking at the papers, I'm just taking this on the back of looking at the papers that were presented to the Minister in the latter part of 2016. It looks as though the cost of adopting the Scottish approach would have been considerable in the short term. There were significant one-off costs, and then it would have had a greater running cost as well. That's what I can see just looking at the papers. I wasn't, as I say, involved in any of that.
And equally, do you know are you aware of the reasons why the English scheme was chosen to follow?
Well, ultimately, the Minister made that decision in December. So I imagine she looked at the material that had been presented to her in the previous submissions. I think the officials started to present her with the options mid-year, and there were several submissions. I think they're attached as evidence that then ultimately led to her decision in December.
Was there any consultation, in as far as you're aware, with those that were infected and affected prior to the Minister taking this decision in December 2016 to follow the English scheme?
My understanding is that there was a UK-wide consultation during 2016, and the figures I've seen are that 2% of respondents were from Northern Ireland, but we weren't ever provided, as I understand it, a breakdown of what people from Northern Ireland's views were. I mean, they're small numbers, so there'd be an issue with that, I appreciate. The consultation report was published, and we had access just to the published information, nothing else, as I understand it.
So other than that UK-wide consultation, there wasn't a specific consultation with Northern Ireland infected and affected community about the proposal and then the decision to follow the English scheme.
That's correct, as I understand it, yes.
Moving on then to the position once there was no Northern Ireland Assembly and the Department of Health was left without a minister. Was consideration given, insofar as you are aware, to Westminster exercising direct rule?
Well, at the highest level, I think that's something that is really beyond this discussion. There were political talks throughout the 3 years of suspension. They ebbed and flowed in terms of the possibility of success as civil servants in the administration. We were not cited on the detail of that. And at any time within that 3 years, I guess we could have had the restoration of the devolved government here. It was totally unprecedented in the history of Northern Ireland to have this situation where we had no Northern Ireland Executive, no Northern Ireland Assembly, no direct rule, and therefore no ministers in any department. We had no Minister of Health. And that went on for 3 years was totally unexpected and unprecedented, I think, from a point of view of a civil servant in government.
So, so just to explore with you a little bit about what that meant on the ground in practice for the Department of Health. I understand from your witness statement that what that meant was that the permanent secretary, Richard Pengelly, was the person that was the decision maker for the Department of Health. Is that right?
Ultimately, yes. In the absence of a minister, it falls to the permanent secretary. That's correct.
And what powers and what restrictions on those powers does the permanent secretary have in those circumstances? What are the principles that are applied?
Yes, we were issued actually with some guidance in 2017. After a few months, I think it was first part of the year, on how to conduct ourselves in the absence of ministers, because already that had gone on for quite some time. And subsequently that guidance, this was issued from the director or the head of government legal service. That was subsequently updated, and in 2018, in fact, there was a very significant judicial review in which decisions of civil servants in Northern Ireland were overturned because of this issue that those decisions were deemed to be not decisions that civil servants should have taken without ministers. So towards the end of 2018, an Act of Parliament was made that basically then resulted in some guidance, which is termed the Guidance on Decision Making for Northern Ireland Departments during period of Northern Ireland Executive Formation. So that was towards the end of 2018, I guess, recognising that this situation was now protracted. It had gone on for nearly 2 years at that point. So from early in 2017, we were issued with guidance on how to conduct ourselves, and essentially this is all around major policy decisions or policy decisions that would change the policy intent or result in significant expenditure, and particularly expenditure commitments that would go on into the future, and to that those types of decisions should be taken by ministers. So,
in terms of what that means practically for the running of the scheme, is it right to understand it in this way, that a ministerial decision had been made in December 2016 to follow the English scheme, and so that was the principle that really applied to the decision making by the Department of Health in Northern Ireland until January 2020, when you had a minister back at the head of the department. That was the key principle that you were following.
Yeah, the principle was that we were following the scheme as it was in 2016 at the time the decision was made, as well as an additional subset of that decision was to uplift the payments in line with the way England had uplifted them that year, backdated to April 2016. So that was the point in time at which we lost our minister.
So, so you were, because you were able to set up the scheme during that period and enter into an agreement for the running of the scheme with the BSO. And
That's
you were able,
correct,
yes, and able to issue directions to get the scheme up and running.
That's correct, yes.
Is it right to understand that the key, well, the provisions of the scheme were tied to what the English scheme was because of the decision of Minister O'Neill in December 2016?
Yes, and when it comes to regular payments, we were actually aligned completely until the unexpected announcement in April 2019 of a very significant uplift to the English regular payments to infected beneficiaries. So that was the point of greatest divergence for us. It was actually came 2 years later.
But at the point that the scheme was set up, was there discussion in the Department of Health about, for example, who the beneficiaries should be, whether the bereaved community should include children and parents of deceased infected members? Was there discussion about whether or not there should be cut-off dates by which time treatment causing the infection should have been provided? Were there discussions about whether those infected with hepatitis B should be included in the scheme? Were those sorts of discussions had by the Department of Health in Northern Ireland, or was it simply a question of saying our hands are tied effectively to what the English scheme is, and if the English scheme says X, we have to say X?
Yeah, I think once we got to 2017, that was the situation we were in. I can't speak for going back to 2016. Certainly, from my perspective, and I just have to stress here that this is actually quite a small part of my role. I have a very, very broad scope to my role, covering health improvement and all aspects of health protection policy, as well as emergency planning and response. So this is quite a small part of my job, so I wouldn't be involved in detailed discussions all the time. That's delegated to my team. But I would say that on parents and children, I can't recall any representations to us about that specific discussions about that since I came into post. And similarly, hepatitis B, that's never come across my desk in the time I've been here. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the middle point you asked me about. There were three things.
So the scheme provides that treatment causing the infection, if one is infected with hepatitis C, must have taken place before September 1991, and HIV is February 1992.
Yes, again, and until I got asked that in the Rule 9 request, I hadn't been involved in any discussions about that.
So that's that's a factual answer, that in fact those matters never came across your desk and there weren't those discussions insofar as you're aware. But my question is more as a matter of principle. Could, given the situation that you were in at that time, could you have actually made any changes to? Could you have departed from what was in the English scheme when you set it up?
Well, it was very difficult for us to do anything that would have incurred significant and recurrent financial commitments because the permanent secretary is the accounting officer in the department, and the person in that role is required to have a business case for underpinning public expenditure. And so it is quite difficult to make long-term commitments. And I mean, the other point that's made in the guidance is to be very, very careful if you're going to tie the hands of a future minister with any decision that you take as a civil servant in this situation that we were in, albeit an extremely unusual situation where we had no minister for a very long period of time. So I think if you're taking the hepatitis B point and the parents and children, those would have, if they had been discussed and opened up for consultation, would have led to, potentially led to ongoing recurrent financial commitments that we didn't feel we were in a position to make those decisions without a minister. And that's a hypothetical answer, though, because we didn't come upon those. Yes.
What I'm trying to understand, and is the extent to which you were tied to the English scheme, and the extent to which you could have come up with a scheme that was slightly different. I'm putting to one side the issue about not the expenditure issue, but if you wanted to make a different decision which wouldn't necessarily increase expenditure, would you have been able to, given the ministerial decision in December 2016 to follow the English scheme and the fact that you were a department without a minister? As a matter of principle, would you have been able to depart from the English scheme?
Well, we felt that we couldn't, and reading the guidance, we didn't think we could, and we felt that that was our best guide to what we should be doing in these 3 years, as it turned out to be, 3 years, was to adhere to the last ministerial decision we had. And again, the guidance does refer to that. You refer back to the last ministerial decision or the position of the last minister you had, and you are to abide by that decision unless there's a very strong case to do otherwise. And it is worth us saying here, and I don't know if you're going to come to this later, but we didn't stop working on this. I mean, our work ebbed and flowed, and we're very small in the department, you know, in terms of the number of people dedicated to this. It was part of one person's job in my team. But we didn't stop through these years, and particularly in 2019, we did extensive work to see if we could create a business case for our permanent secretary to make decisions on the back of. We didn't ever have to deploy that because very grateful as we were, the executive was restored and Minister Swan came to lead our department. And in fact, the work that we had done during 2019, the financial analysis and economic analysis that we'd done under Richard Pengelly's leadership, helped to inform what we presented to Minister Swan when he came into post, and assisted with rapid decision making then. So the time wasn't wasted, albeit that I fully accept that had we had a minister, we could have moved quickly to decisions. And of course, ultimately, as Minister Swan has talked about this morning, he made decisions that, in fact, and regular payments mean that none of our beneficiaries are worse off than their English counterparts, if you like.
Just trying to understand the way that you were having to manage Department of Health business during the time when there was no minister. You've talked about the principle of trying to stay true, if I can put it that way, to Minister O'Neill's decision, and that really being the key principle that you were applying. You've spoken in your witness statement about something you call the inescapable pressure. Can you tell us a bit about what that means and how that factored into decision making?
I'd need to see the context. If you could tell me where exactly that is, maybe that would help.
I think you say, I think it's in the context of saying that you would follow, that you follow government policy, making decisions that you can make decisions that might involve additional spending or a change in policy where there is an inescapable pressure. And you talk about it in the context of it perhaps leading to legal consequences.
What I might do, if you don't mind, if you can just give me the reference so I can look at that, and maybe we could
Yes.
come back to that after the break, because
Yes.
I'd like to just really see what it is
Okay,
you're
well, shall I,
referring to there.
before we break, shall I give you the reference, and I can come back and ask you that, and you can have a look at that over the break.
That would be good.
I will try to remember that. Let me just make a note for myself. Thank you. Okay. So the scheme that was set up in December 2017 was a scheme that echoed the English scheme. Is that your understanding? Is that what you were? Was that your aim?
Yes, that was our aim, and unfortunately for us, England had proceeded with a consultation during 2017, in which they actually introduced subsequently their special category mechanism for enhanced support for hepatitis stage 1, hepatitis C stage 1, and also income top-ups. So I think by the end of that year, we had already lost parity on those things, and they're things that we did consider looking at more closely during the subsequent year. But again, we came head on into this problem that we didn't know when we would get a minister back. We believed that we needed a minister to make significant decisions, which in the most extreme case would have doubled our annual recurrent cost of the scheme. So we did have to delay that, and as Minister Swan said, these are things that we are now going to look at.
So why, if the last ministerial decision was parity with the English scheme, did the department feel it was unable to introduce special category mechanism when the scheme began so there would be parity with the English scheme?
Well, I think my interpretation of the papers I've seen is it's parity with the English scheme as it was. It wasn't necessarily saying that the commitment was to track everything that changed in the English scheme, particularly as I've just pointed out, if all the stage 1 hepatitis C beneficiaries received extra support, that could in fact double the cost of our entire scheme. So the decision that Minister O'Neill made included the uplift in 2016 because that was a financial commitment. So our interpretation was that any further financial commitment would need a ministerial support, and if not, it needed a business case, which, as I said, we did start working on. We deferred rather than didn't decide, and we continued to work on it, and we knew what it was that a permanent secretary would need to have at their disposal if they were going to make decisions in the absence of minister, and we strove to acquire information and analysis to assist in supporting that decision if the situation had gone on any longer.
So would you accept that by taking the approach that one had to consider the English scheme, as it were, frozen in time in December 2016, that in fact Northern Ireland ended up departing from the English scheme right from the very beginning of the scheme's existence?
It did in respect to the special category mechanism that was introduced and the income top-ups, but in regular payments we were in line until April 2019 when unexpectedly the announcement was made in England, and we weren't prepared for that.
Yes, so you've said that on a couple of occasions that announcement was unexpected. Was there no warning at all from England that they were going to uplift their payments?
Not in my recollection, no.
And the department took the same approach in April 2019 that really they had to stick to parity with the English scheme as it was in December 2016 and couldn't make a decision to for there to be parity in April 2019. Is that right?
That's right, but I think the very obvious widening of disparity that occurred because of that announcement meant that we diverted resources back into doing more analytical work to try to build a business case to present to our permanent secretary, which he would have needed to make a decision. So it was a factor in our picking up that work again in the second half of 2019. As well as that, there'd been a meeting, I think it was in July 2019, I'd have to look at my timeline on that, where there was the Four Nations ministers met about the whole issue of parity, presumably because this disparity had opened up because of that announcement in England on regular payments for infected beneficiaries. And our permanent secretary attended that in the absence of a minister. So they've very actively picked up conversations then on a Four Nations basis about the schemes and about parity, which we've remained engaged in ever since.
And has there been any assessment of the needs or losses of the infected and affected community at any stage that you're aware of by the Department of Health of Northern Ireland?
I'm not aware of any assessments like that, but it was definitely the topic of conversation between ourselves and our permanent secretary on a number of occasions in 2019. Because again, taking a purely sort of government expenditure point of view, assessing the need and matching the public spending to the need would obviously be ideal, but it's very challenging to do that, as I'm sure you'd be aware. And in discussing it, we did realise the challenge in doing something like that.
So consideration of doing it, but decision not to do it because of the challenge.
Well, we as I said, we did do some work on, looking at cost of living differentials and that sort of thing. So taking it more not from the individual, but from the point of view of beneficiaries in Northern Ireland versus beneficiaries in other parts of the United Kingdom. But that's as far as we went with that, because engagement directly with beneficiaries is difficult for the department for reasons of the confidentiality that beneficiaries wish to retain. So if you're talking about a needs assessment that's based on individual needs, that's a very sensitive area. So no, we didn't progress anything on that further.
So just sticking then with parity and taking the story through, we heard evidence from Minister Swan this morning, and he deferred a number of questions to you. So I'm just going to pick those questions up with you. What engagement was there between the Department of Health, Northern Ireland and Westminster about the changes to the scheme between January and March 2021?
January and March 2021, so we're right forward into this year.
Yeah.
My team engage frequently on a Four Nations basis, and I'm talking every 2 weeks or 4 weeks. There's meetings, and they had been discussing parity right through the previous years, in fact, and how to achieve that. And there'd been various bits of financial analysis done, and I understand there was financial analysis done leading up to March as well, to gather the current costs of the scheme, categories of payment, and compare between the Four Nations. I haven't been very involved in this myself since the start of last year due to the COVID responsibilities I have and continue to have. But my team have been doing that work, quite detailed work.
So a sort of a general question, that you've spoken about the lack of advance notice in April 2019 from Westminster Government about uplift, and there's reference in the papers from 2016 to, again, problems with Westminster not giving advance notice to the department in Northern Ireland. has there been a different approach in relation to the parity discussions this year?
My impression is that there has been right up until the very last, and I understand that right at the very end there was a slight change in direction. Well, it's quite a significant change in direction, in fact, which was only communicated to us with about 1.5 hours notice. We needed to get clearance from our Department of Finance. So it was relating to the length of time that we would be in receipt of funds to fund the uplifts. We had been on the understanding that it would be for 6 years, and very, very late in the day, the news came through that no, it would only be for 3 years, with us picking up the recurrent costs thereafter. So it's obviously very significant ongoing financial commitment. That did wrong foot us a bit, and caused a huge amount of pressure on my team, getting clearance from our finance and Department of Finance to agree to take on that additional recurrent cost. I think the generality of it, I think, was more engagement than we'd had in the past, my understanding.
And in relation to the announcement about the compensation framework, was that something that you had been in discussion with Westminster about prior to the announcement on the 25th of March this year?
Personally, none, but I understand from my team that they weren't involved in that either. So
that was if you like, a surprise on the 25th of March, in the 25th of March announcement.
That's my understanding, yeah.
And do you know or have any understanding of when funding will be made available by Westminster so the new payments can be made?
No, I don't have a time frame. I think the intention is that this will be all done within this financial year, but I don't have a time frame for when money will be made available. This is the third of the 3 years, so that's something that means that even from very soon we're going to have to find the additional money. But yes, I understand that this will be done within this financial year.
So the money that you hope to get very soon will be effectively back payments for that arise from the announcements, and then you need to fund those ongoing costs yourself.
That's correct, yeah.
And do you have a time frame for how long it will take the department to consult on, develop and implement the equivalent of the special category mechanism?
I think this is really next on our work list. As I think Minister Swan stated this morning, we've had to deflect all our energy into the preparations for these sessions today, and the team has not been able to do a lot else in the recent past. But this is we're in phase 2 of the 3 phases of our review, which Minister Swan outlined this morning, and this was going to be part of that anyway. So we'll just be moving on with that very quickly. As Minister Swan said, we intend to do this in consultation with the infected and affected beneficiary community. So we haven't yet worked out exactly how we're going to do that, but it's really top priority as soon as we get through today, if you like. Yeah.
And so, if I can just press you a bit more on that, what does that mean in terms of weeks, months? I appreciate that it's a ballpark figure, but are you able to give us a ballpark figure as to how long it would take to consult and design and implement such a scheme?
I couldn't do that at this point because we haven't worked out precisely how we're going to do it. It's obviously a delicate area, and doing that kind of consultation needs to be done with care. We know there's divergent views, quite vastly divergent views on it, so within the community itself. So we need to do it with care. I mean, the backdating gives some cover in that there's going to be a backdating of these payments. So, but obviously we want to move as quickly as we can. As Minister Swan has said himself, we don't want to hang around, and he's shown his track record this year is that he's moved as quickly as he can since he got into post to get decisions made.
And does the department have a preferred model at the moment in mind between the existing Welsh, Scottish, English model?
No, we have an open mind on this. We need consultation to be real and open. We don't want to go in with preconceived ideas. The point of the consultative approach is that we take on board all the different types of approaches that we might adopt, and it might be none of the above. I don't know until we've got into the work.
I'm going to ask you some questions now on the approach the scheme has taken to various different to beneficiaries and payments and so on. So slight change of topic. We understand from evidence that you've given and other witnesses that when the Alliance House organisations were providing data on beneficiaries to the new schemes, they provided very limited data and didn't provide information about those beneficiaries who had applied to the Alliance House organisations and been rejected. Is that the same for Northern Ireland, that you didn't receive a list of names and contact details for those that were rejected by the Alliance House organisations?
That's correct, as I understand it. And just to make it clear that the Department of Health wouldn't be in receipt of that information anyway. It would be the BSO as the administrators. But my understanding is that information wasn't made available.
What do you know, or what would be the attitude of the BSO to an application from such a person? Would they say, you got rejected by the Alliance House organisations, therefore we're not going to even consider your application, or would they consider the application on its merits?
I can't speak for them, but I know that they have a without prejudice sort of basis of considering applications, but I think you'd have to take that up with them. Do you know what steps they have taken to identify new beneficiaries? We have. I'd just go back to some of the documents that were in the papers. There has at various times been approaches to different parties in Northern Ireland to try to get the message out there to make sure people are aware of the scheme who might be eligible. And I do know that there's been material put on the website's BSO website, our own website last year, 2019, we put a page up about this. And NI Direct, which is the government portal in Northern Ireland. There's also the clinicians who deal with people, I know, are very active in making sure that as much as possible they're aware of what benefits might be available to them, or what financial support might be available to them. I know that from the meetings I've been in with them. So there's been a certain amount of publicity around the inquiry, and I think that's been a good thing in getting the message out there about the support schemes. And we do know, though, that there's more that we could do, and it's therefore one of the work streams in our phase 2 of the review. And I know from my team they're considering, or in fact actively going to do, a sort of leaflet and poster type of approach, for GP surgeries and so forth, to just publicise the scheme, and particularly the psychological support, which we think we could get out there more, which is non-financial, but is obviously very valuable to the people who are availing of that service.
Does the department ask, or does the BSO undertake any kind of analysis of the scheme members or beneficiaries to establish whether there might be some gaps, i.e. areas of the country where there are no beneficiaries, so it may be the clinical networks are not working terribly well in passing down the messages in that area, or cohorts of patients, for example, those might have sickle cell anemia or thalassemia, or some cohorts that aren't well represented as beneficiaries in the scheme. Is that kind of work undertaken?
I'm not aware, but I think that would need to be addressed to them. We're not doing any work like that. But,
and you're not instructing them to do any work like that?
No.
And does the department know whether there are any members or beneficiaries who have become infected via their treatment for sickle cell anemia or for thalassemia on the scheme?
I'm not aware one way or the other on that. I wouldn't be presented with that kind of detail.
And do you know whether that's information that the scheme collects?
I don't know, I'm afraid, no.
So just understanding broadly the division of responsibility, if I can put it that way, between the BSO running the scheme and the Department of Health. Is it right to understand that the Department of Health it makes the policy decisions and the scheme implement them?
Broadly speaking, yes.
And so in terms of looking at, for example, the eligibility criteria for somebody to apply to come onto the scheme, Department of Health would set out what that eligibility criteria is, who the categories of beneficiaries are, how they would have had to become infected and so on. And then those applications would be determined by the BSO.
That's correct, and the service level agreement sets out those criteria.
In relation to discretionary payments, it is a little bit different, isn't it? Because is it right that the Department of Health not only sets the criteria, but also carries out the assessment of the applications?
Yes, that's correct. This was something that was caught by our suspension of the executive at the start of 2017, before we got to develop a policy about this. So what we've done in order to make it as objective as possible is we've made those determinations based on the English guidance, and we also, within my team, there's one person that looks at those, and then their manager signs them off. So it's not just one person. I accept that it's not ideal. It's something we would like to sort out. We do foresee, though, that the more substantial changes that needed to be made, which are the ones that Minister Swan has made around uplifting the regular payments, should make these discretionary grants less necessary for people. But yes, the absence of a Northern Ireland policy was difficult because we didn't have a policy that we could hand to BSO and ask them to do that for us. However, we have, as I say, we've used the English guidance, which is reasonably clear, and in that way have had some consistency, I think, over our decision making.
So just ask you a couple of questions in relation to that. So there are two, what I understand to be discretionary payments available on the scheme. Excuse me. One is one-off grants, and the other is income top-up. Is it right to understand that the department assesses the applications for both those types of discretionary payments?
Right. The answer I've just given you is for the grants. I beg your pardon if I didn't fully understand that was a more embracing question. So that was just the answer I've given you is about the grants. So the income top-ups, we inherited income top-ups and arrangements around income top-ups from the Alliance House organisations. And to my knowledge, we haven't adjusted those. They've remained as they were at that time when we inherited them.
So the answer to the question whether or not the department assesses those applications for income top-up, is the answer to that yes or no?
No.
No. So those are assessed by
no.
BSO.
And we have actually recent announcements by the minister when the substantial increases in regular payments were made recurrent, the income top-ups were removed. So we no longer have that there.
Okay, so just sticking then with the income top-up payments. So they, as I understand the evidence that's been submitted, is this right, that some beneficiaries, 15 beneficiaries, transferred over from the Alliance House organisations with income top-up applications, and those income top-up applications were honoured, if I can put it that way, by the scheme, so that they wouldn't lose any money. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And there is a reference in the information that's been provided to the inquiry by, I think, Karen Bailey, that there have been 3 applications for income top-up, but only one of those has succeeded. Is that your understanding?
I'm afraid I don't have first-hand knowledge of that. But if that would either have to be directed to them, or I'd need to come back to you on it.
Are you aware of the response to the 2020 survey, in which many beneficiaries responding to that survey were unaware that there were income top-up payments? Is that something that's come across your desk?
Yeah, I am aware of that, and it links back to your question about the publicity. I suppose just linking to that, I probably should say that BSO have written out to beneficiaries. So this is current beneficiaries, perhaps, but your earlier question, I think, was about people who aren't beneficiaries. Are they aware of the scheme? Whereas this question, this is a little bit about if people are beneficiaries, are they aware of additional things? And I think in 2019, BSO wrote out to everybody to make sure they were aware of all the components of the scheme that they might wish to apply for or avail of in the case of the psychological support. And I also do know that our scheme administrator, is in contact with beneficiaries and with people that are newly coming onto the scheme. I understand he does run through with them the different types of support that are available.
So given that in 2019 a letter was written out to all the beneficiaries explaining to them what support they could apply for, was it a surprise to you when you saw the 2020 survey to see that actually a lot of people responding to that survey were still unaware that they could apply for income top-up payments?
Yeah, I mean, the same applies to psychological support. There was low awareness of that, if I recall, as well. It was a surprise, but then not a surprise because it's just human nature, isn't it? Letters coming through the mailbox might not, just one letter 2 years ago, is probably not enough, and we think we could do more. And as I said, that's in our phase two, to look at some of these things. We've had to pick off the different parts of the scheme that we want to look at in an order, because we can't do it all at once. We've tried to address the big issues first, but this is important that we make sure that there's more awareness. Even though there's no income top-ups now, we've addressed it in a way by just increasing the overall level of regular payments. There's still other aspects that we'd like people to be more aware of, and that links to the leaflet and poster idea that my team have got to follow up on.
So I think you've told us that that the department hasn't drawn up its own policy on income top-up, but has been applying, and we looked at a document this morning which we can go to if it assists, but has been applying the policies that were implemented by the Alliance House organisations, so the McFarlane Trust and the Caxton Foundation. Is that your understanding?
I actually don't know that. I think earlier on I was, again, it was a little mix-up there, because I was talking about applying the English guidance on the discretionary grants, which we do. And I know that guidance was included in the papers there. That's the way we get consistency over discretionary grants. And I apologise for the mix-up there. But with the income top-up, I just can't recall if I have come across the origin of the policy in that. I can't recall it now.
It might be helpful if I take you to the document rather than asking you a question about something you can't remember. It's WITN 5570021. So we can see that this is a memo from Seamus Camplisson to Richard Pengelly of the 4th of March 2020. And it's about interim payments to beneficiaries of the Northern Ireland scheme for the end of 2019-2020 financial year, and it's said to be urgent because a decision is required. Can we go to page 22? And it's under other financial support at para 54. So it just sets out the position there. Prior to April 2019, Northern Ireland had parity with England on regular payments. However, there was no parity on other financial aspects of the scheme, including special category mechanism, and we've spoken about that. Income top-ups. In England, both the rates and income thresholds are higher than in Northern Ireland, where the legacy Caxton and McFarlane lower rates are still used. And that was the question I was asking you. Is that your understanding, that it's the legacy Caxton and McFarlane rates that are used rather than the English scheme rates?
Yes, I can confirm that. I thought, I apologise if I misunderstood you. I thought you were asking about the actual way of assessing applicants on the income top-ups, but absolutely the rates remain the legacy rates. This is another one of the aspects of the English scheme that was consulted on in 2017 that we haven't been able to catch up on.
And why use the legacy rates and not the IBS rates?
Again, this was caught up in the decision-making over expenditure changes and ongoing commitments, which I've covered earlier in this session. They were all tied up together in the things that England changed in 2017, but we felt unable to move on. And of course, as I've explained, there were political talks ongoing throughout the 3 years, and at any time we could have had an executive returned, and we didn't want to tie the hands of future minister. So it was tied up in that bundle of things.
But I'd understood that the in terms of the other payments, that the IBS rates were being used. So, for example, we'll come to look at this in a moment, on the discretionary support one-off grants, for example, you've told us that the IBS policy is used, so the IBS rates are used. Was there something different about the income top-up?
I guess the difference is that income top-ups are recurrent, and the sums overall larger. And the one-off, the discretionary support, the sums are relatively small, and it was more that we're using the guidance so that we have some consistency in how we assess the applicants.
So was there a concern that that the cost of the scheme should be kept as low as possible? So even if that means not parity with the IBS scheme, because you're using the old AHO rates, that principle is more important than the parity principle. When the departments are operating without a minister.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we've talked about earlier. Michelle O'Neill's decision in December 2016 was to adopt the same scheme as England as it was then, and also, additionally, to uplift the rates as England had planned to do, backdated to 2016 April. So we took that as the starting position, the outgoing minister's policy position, and we didn't feel able to move on these things that would have wired in recurrent expenditure. And that is regarding the fact that our permanent secretary making decisions in the absence of a minister needs to have a business case. We had a situation where political talks were ongoing, and we could have had ministers return, and we then did proceed, as time went on, to undertake the financial and economic assessment that was needed to prepare the way for decisions to be taken, either through a business case being presented to Richard Pengelly or through the return of a minister.
Turning then on to discretionary payments, and you've already given, you can take that down, Shamik. You've already given some evidence in relation to that, but just to give a bit of detail and perhaps take you to a document. You've explained that the department didn't form its own policy in relation to discretionary one-off payments, and that you applied the English policy. Can we? Do you know whether or not the English policy whether or not applicants were told that the English policy was being applied? Is that something that was made clear to applicants on the website or in communication with them from the from the department?
Well, it's interesting because in preparing for this, I did ask whether we linked through to it on our website, and we don't. I can't say how it was discussed between the BSO administrator applicants, but I can certainly follow that up if you'd like to know.
If we just look at the policy, it's WITN 4066015. So that's the English discretionary one-off payment guidance, and it's the table that I wanted to just draw your attention to. Discretionary one-off payment type is down the left-hand side, and then maximum payment per annum, we're told at the top of the table, is on the right-hand side. So it explains the types of payments that are available, and it explains what somebody can expect to get as a maximum in an individual year. Would you agree that it would be helpful, useful and fair for this information to be provided to applicants who are making applications for one-off grants?
Our intention was to develop our own policy and make that information available. Again, I think we got caught in this hiatus in government. I accept it's not ideal, and that applicants would wish to see this. Now, again, I cannot tell you for sure. I can't tell you from my own first-hand knowledge whether or not this is shared. This is a question we would have to put to BSO.
But whatever the answer to that is, my question is, would you accept that given that the department were applying this policy, i.e. somebody would only be able to receive a grant for the items that are in the left-hand column, and somebody would only receive a maximum of what's set out in the right-hand column, that it would be helpful and fair for the applicant to know that in advance of making the application?
Yes, I agree.
Are you aware, perhaps we just go through this policy, in fact. So that's the table on the first page. And if we go to page 3, so, for example, looking at counselling, it explains a little bit about what's available. A discretionary payment is available, and it sets out what somebody must provide in order to make the application. So there's a number of bits of evidence that need to be provided, and then there's some additional information about other counselling services there. And the policy goes through all the various different types of application that can be sought, and sets out this kind of information. And at the end of the policy, if we go to the penultimate page, sorry, I don't have a page number. Yes, so the page before that. It has a list of discretionary payments that will not be considered at the bottom, and it sets out a number of payments, and you'll see the star by the word considered. And if we go over the page, we see at the end of that this is not an exhaustive list. So the reason I wanted to take you through, Shamit, you can take that down now. The reason I wanted to take you through that policy or guidance document was just because my next question is, are you aware of whether or not there's any guidance for the department about how to carry out these applications? And I just wanted to illustrate, just make the point that guidance about how the applications are assessed is not set out in this document. So my question to you is there any guidance that you're aware of that sets out how the department should assess an application for a discretionary grant?
I'm not aware of any additional guidance. I think we look to our civil servants who are qualified for their roles and apply judgment and fairness and discipline to what they do. So I understand why you're asking that question, but I just want to take you back to what I was saying about our aim would be that financial support is sufficient for the beneficiaries, that they do not have to apply for these one-off discretionary grants, that we move away from that and make sure, as we have done with the uplifts and the recent announcements, that financial support is is adequate to cover daily household needs and other events and requirements in life that happen not all the time but occasionally and require financial input, if you like.
So you've explained that a decision's already been made to stop the discretionary top-up payments. Is there has a decision been made about the future of the discretionary one-off grants that we're discussing now?
No, it hasn't yet, and it was on is on our phase 2 list of things we need to get to. Because we know it's not ideal that we're using the English guidance. We need our own policy, but we also have treated all applications on face value. I think there's some indication that the intention was that means testing should be applied. We've never done that. We just accept people's statement of need, and then we assess it against those guidelines.
So can I just take you to some information in your witness statement. So your witness statement is at WITN 5570021. And just to understand in a bit more detail how these applications are assessed. So you sorry, I've given you the wrong reference. That's why. WITN 557. Sorry, WITN 406 6001. It's your witness statement, and if we can go to page 21. Sorry? Yes, sorry, I've given you again the wrong number. 406 6002. Sorry, page 21. Right, that's better. So you've explained that when you have an application in, you look at the statement of need, and by that, do you mean the reason that the person says they need the one-off, the discretionary grant?
That's right, yeah.
And then no means testing is carried out. So if is this right, that if the department is satisfied that the person needs it, then they will get it?
Well, if the department is satisfied that it meets the it meets the requirements of the guidance that we're applying, then it will be agreed, regardless of any financial hardship being evidenced or not.
So if it's one of the categories of grants that appeared in that left-hand table of the IBS guidance, then the grant's likely to be made, to be awarded.
That's correct, yes.
And so we look. Can we look at paragraph 16.1 of the document that's on the screen, and we can see there the percentage of successful applications for each financial year. 2017, 2018, 67%, 60%, 73%, 100%. Can you give us an explanation as to why the applications have become increasingly successful?
I can't, because I don't know the details, but I can tell you something about this, and this is that it's very small numbers. And you'll know that if you've got very small numbers, then it doesn't take much to shift a percentage. So I think that's the comment I would make about that.
Can I? You can take that down now, Shamik. I'm going to ask you some questions now about the other, about some questions of detail about the new payments that have been announced. Again, these are questions that were deferred by Minister Swan this morning. So can we turn up the announcement, please? It's 5570018. The first, and it's the second, so that this is the announcement, but the written ministerial statement by Mr. Swan. And if we can go down to the bottom of that page, to the bullet points, please. The first one, payments for non-infected bereaved spouses or partners will increase from 75% of the deceased beneficiary's annual payment to an automatic 100% for the first year, with 75% in the subsequent years, in line with policy in Scotland, backdated to 1st of April 2019. And the question is, why is it only backdated to the 1st of April 2019?
Well, my understanding, and I wasn't involved in any direct discussions about this due to my current role with coronavirus regulations and so on. But I would say that my understanding is that those dates were given to us by Cabinet Office, I think it was. But I can see the rationale when I look at this, because that was the date at which the regular payments were uplifted for infected beneficiaries. So when I look at this, I can see that pattern, and that the lump sums go back to April 2017, because then it captures everybody who's in our schemes. So that's how I see that distinction, though my understanding is that we weren't responsible for those decisions about the selection of those dates.
And the same question is asked about the second bullet point, which is in relation to the introduction of an enhanced support packet payments for hepatitis C stage 1 beneficiaries, so special category mechanism or its counterpart. Again, the same question. What would your response be to that?
It would be the same answer, because enhanced support payments are another form of regular payment. So the logic I can see there that's come out of London is that's when the big uplift occurred in England to the regular payments.
And then a question in relation to the third bullet point, which is the £10,000 bereavement lump sum, and it's a question of clarification. So £10,000 bereavement lump sum, which has been provided since the scheme was established in 2017, will now be payable to the estate of the deceased in cases where there's no living spouse or partner, in line with the position in England and Wales. This will be backdated to 1st of April 2017, meaning all eligible beneficiaries currently registered on the scheme will receive the appropriate payment in arrears. And the question is really, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that is a payment that only applies if the death has occurred after the 1st of April 2017, or does it mean something different?
My understanding is as you've just described it.
So it applies to a death that has occurred after the 1st of April 2017?
That would be my interpretation of that, yes.
And do you know why that decision was made?
Well, again, I think these were, you've got to appreciate the context of this was a Four Nations approach led by Cabinet Office, and it was about aligning across the Four Nations with respect to these categories of payment. So what's under this is that there's been a decision taken that's the date from which the funding will be made available to do that.
And then the last question is in relation to both the fourth and the fifth bullet points, which are the increase to lump sum payments. The fourth bullet point for hepatitis stage 1 beneficiaries, and the fifth bullet point, which is over the page, in relation to HIV beneficiaries. Let's read the fifth one because it's slightly shorter. The lump sum payment to an HIV beneficiary will increase from the current range of payments to a maximum of £80,500, depending on circumstances, to an automatic £80,500 backdated to 1st of April 27, meaning all eligible beneficiaries currently registered with the scheme will receive any appropriate additional payment in arrears, subject to the lump sum previously received. Does that mean that somebody who received, let's say, the minimum payment in 2000 will now get an uplift to £80,500, or does that mean something different?
I'll need to go back and absolutely check this for sure, but that would be my understanding. And I also understand that we're a little hampered here because we don't actually have information from the Alliance House organisations on what people were paid before. So, but I might have to come back to you on that just so that I'm absolutely sure and absolutely clear.
I note the time, sir. I wonder if now is an appropriate time to break. I've got a couple of points that I just want to clarify before we do break, if now is an appropriate time.
Yes, certainly. But just before we do, may I just ask one question? You've just said, I think, that the Alliance House organisations didn't tell you about how much they had actually paid to beneficiaries.
Yes, they wouldn't tell us. It would be the scheme administrator, BSO. But my understanding is that quite minimal information was handed over about the beneficiaries, and information on lump sums that might have been paid in the past was not part of the information handed over. But I can double check that for you just to be absolutely sure.
The year April, beginning 1st of April 17, would be the financial year, would it, during which the Alliance House organisations ceased to function as they had, and the respective governments of the devolved nations and England took over under their own schemes. Would that be right?
That's correct, yes.
So the choice of the date of 1st of April 2017 may have an explanation in those two facts, might it?
Yes, I think I mentioned earlier that my logic that I see in this is the fact that that date means that everybody in the 4 now separate schemes is captured by that. So that's the reason for going back to then, because it captures all beneficiaries across the UK.
So it might follow, this is a question really inviting a comment. It might follow, might it, that if it was accepted that there was a moral case that anyone who had suffered a bereavement as a consequence of HIV infection from those from whom they were bereaved at any time previously would be losing out in the sense of being given compensation for that, because the government back in the 1980s and since had chosen to establish the Alliance House organisations as they did. Would that be fair, or would it not?
Well, it would be a statement of fact that they weren't eligible to receive these payments that have been announced.
Yes.
That would be a statement of fact.
Well, I'll leave it there, but thank you very much. We'll come back then at 5 to 4, shall we?
Can I just make two points to one generally, which is that my point entirely. I think I have been my fault entirely. I think I've been certainly at one point, certainly possibly more, suggested that it was the Northern Ireland Assembly that collapsed, and in fact it was the Northern Ireland Executive. Is that right?
Well, yes, the institutions, I suppose, all go together, but yes, we tend to talk about it as the executive, the power-sharing executive, which is the like the cabinet of ministers, if you like, in Northern Ireland, as to just equate it to.
So I've been asked to clarify that with you. And the second thing I wanted to raise with you, Ms. Redmond, was I've been handed up all the references in your witness statement to the phrase inescapable pressure, because I think you wanted to have a look at that over the break. And those are at page 6, paragraph 2BG, page 9, 2D1, and page 14, 7.3. In your second witness statement, I should make that clear.
Oh,
But I think it's the first of those that actually defines what is meant,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes, it is. Thank you, sir.
So I was going to look at that over the break.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Well, if you need a cup of tea and don't want to do it until later, by all means, it's something you can respond to later, should you wish. But if you do, we should be grateful. But at the moment, we'll come back at 5 to 4. 5 to 4.